The United Nations is calling for Ukraine to release thousands of disabled people from its care institutions after a BBC investigation reveals systematic abuse and neglect. The BBC team who first broke the story were asked to give evidence to the UN after finding severely malnourished children and teenagers tied to benches and adults living in cots. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports now from Geneva.
These are the hidden lives of confinement we uncovered in Ukraine's network of institutions. We saw malnourishment, mistreatment and underdevelopment from years of neglect. Like Oleg, trapped in a bedridden existence, denied the chance to live independently. And Vasil, taken from his family and tied to a bench, ignored by a system that does not care. And Anna, grinding her teeth through the anxiety of childhood trauma. We told their stories on behalf of thousands of disabled people locked away in places like this across Ukraine. And then we were invited to bring that testimony to the United Nations to give evidence to its Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Now we have its conclusions. The committee is calling for Ukraine to free disabled people from homes, what it calls deinstitutionalisation. It also calls for alternative care in the community so that disabled people can live independently or with families. But breaking up such a long-standing system means challenging outdated attitudes and changing an ingrained mindset. At the top, the First Lady admits Ukraine owes these young people more.
Ми хочемо, щоб діти в першу чергу потрапляли до родин.
We want kids to stay in foster families and adopted families. There should be no more orphanages around. And I think that we will use this time to overhaul the entire system, to change it entirely.
But the war will make that so much more difficult. This is what's left of Borodyanka after 3 weeks of Russian occupation. 12 disabled people died in an institution here, left without basic care. Others were used by Russian forces as human shields. The UN's calling for all orphanages in the occupied areas to be evacuated immediately. It also criticised Ukraine for not considering disabled people in its evacuation plans. Igor and his mum live in fear. His autism and epilepsy make it impossible to leave their home in Kiev, difficult even to take shelter underground. So he and his brother Hleb are trapped.
He
heard Gleb constantly asking me if we were all going to die. Igor understands the things. These questions were terrible. In addition, all the people around started to leave the city.
They feel under threat living next to a factory, which has been targeted by the Russians several times. And it's a struggle even to get the medicines needed to control Igor's seizures.
The period when I found out that there are no medicines for Igor in Ukraine, I thought I would go crazy. So I live in fear all the time. I would like us not to have this panic, but to have some kind of stability.
The wars put pressure on families and made lives of institutional constraint even more difficult. But this system fostered abuse and neglect long before the invasion, and the UN's insistence is that in defending its population, its existence and its freedom, Ukraine must also protect the rights of its disabled people. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Geneva.